Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is Don's Coronet 500 convertible. It's currently not happy. Today's episode of Dead Dodge Garage is brought to you by Whiz brand shock absorber fluid. Shock absorber fluid. I never shock absorber without it. Okay, seriously though, I do sell t-shirts and hats, and you can get yours by going to deaddodgegarage.com and clicking on merch. In fact, please do that. Hey, another quick note. I was featured on the cover of the October 2024 Mopar Collector's Guide. That's me right there with my demon in the ramp truck. So check that out. If you're not already a subscriber, consider picking up a subscription to Mopar Collector's Guide. Thanks again to Mopar Collector's Guide for the feature. I really appreciate it. I did a bunch of videos on this car back when it was here at Rocket and getting assembled. We got it up and running and back to Don the owner toward the end of last summer so we could finally enjoy the car. There have been a bunch of little things to tie up since then, and most of them are now done. One of those videos came way back. It was right after we got the engine installed in the car and we tried to first fire it. It wouldn't run. It wouldn't run because all of the valves were hanging open. At the time, I determined this was a pushrod length problem. Essentially, the pushrods were too long, so they were fully burying the pistons in the hydraulic lifters and hanging the valves open. There were early and late lifter or tappet designs in the big block Chrysler engines, necessitating two different lengths of pushrods, with that change coming around 1967. My assumption then was that we had late lifters with early pushrods or vice versa. I dug around in the back room at Rocket and magically found a set of the correct length pushrods. So I threw those in and got it fired up. All seemed well, but all was not well for long. Don put a few hundred miles on the car, driving it to car shows and on nice days and the like. Randomly, one day, it suddenly developed a misfire. So he drove it over here. He pulled it in the driveway with a dead cylinder, but all else seeming normal. I fired the car up to pull it up and figure out this issue. At that time, the engine oil pressure warning light was stuck on. Turns out, it had punched a pushrod through a rocker, bent said pushrod, and finally, when I fired the car up, spit out that lifter. Thankfully, that situation only existed for about 10 seconds, and after fixing the rocker and the pushrod, all seemed well. Again. And then the car came back for this latest round of repairs and finishing, which included getting the dash buttoned up finally, fixing the turn signals, and tuning the automatic transmission. I test drove the car for my video the other week, and all seemed well. I kind of got the order of events wrong when I was filming this video. All you need to know is Don got the car back, and he was driving it when this happened again. That rocker and the bent pushrod next to it were fixed, and on the next test drive, something else happened, and now it's making noise again. So, obviously there's something wrong here. And today, my job is to try and figure out what that is and fix it once and for all. Step 1. Grab a power tool. And an extension, like a long one. Now, I didn't build this engine. In fact, I don't know who did. They did some things nicely. For example, the whole inside of it is done in that Gliptol paint. Everything appears to be nice and clean, and I don't see anything horribly broken on this side, so maybe this time the issue is on the passenger side. I do want to point out that these rocker arms were reproductions. At one time, we were thinking that may be the issue. Note the two dirtier originals that are mixed in here. Of course, pulling this side is way harder. Someone put fuel lines and a bunch of wiring and ignition parts in the way. Come on. Yahtzee! Now, I mentioned a few moments ago that these are reproduction arms, and every one that is broken was a reproduction arm. But we've also had at least one and maybe two pushrods bend without breaking the arms, so clearly there is another issue. Oh yes, very important to collect the broken piece. Obviously this one's sitting right there where I can reach it, so I will be doing that. Now I want you to understand that this is not a problem I've had to deal with often, or maybe even ever. Maybe twice. Anyway, I'm attacking this as a pushrod issue because we already had that issue once, and because the symptoms kind of make sense to me. There are other possibilities. In fact, what's likely going on here is an issue of stacked tolerances. These heads have been machined. These valves have likely been replaced. The springs are definitely aftermarket pieces with dampers that don't even necessarily seem to fit the heads right. That's a separate issue I'm not worried about for the moment. This is an aftermarket cam, and it's highly likely that the base circle of that cam is bigger than the original. All of these things together, plus aftermarket rocker arms, equal valve train tolerances that are different than would have been expected from the factory. The simple way to actuate a valve or rocker arm to open a valve is with a simple, solid lifter, a chunk of metal, pushing up on the pushrod that then pushes on the rocker. That's what engines like this Poly had. Simple, effective. Those solid lifter equipped valve trains tend to be a little bit on the rattly side though. And so, in their infinite wisdom, Chrysler saw fit to equip these engines with hydraulic lifters. I've taken the liberty of drawing a basic diagram explaining how these things work. Essentially, every valve is actuated by one of these things following a cam lobe. This is a metal cylinder. Inside this metal cylinder is a small collection of parts to make it work. This here is the piston. This is what the pushrod sits on top of. There's a clip holding it into the body. Under the piston, there's a spring. I think there are also like a couple discs. There's various other magic involved here. But essentially what you need to know is oil is fed into this thing and a cushion of it sits under that piston. That oil is used to land that piston in the correct position such that all of the slack is taken out of the pushrod and there's no noise in the valve train. Compare that to the solid lifter design. Essentially, it's the same thing, although some are shaped a little bit differently. They don't have to be complete cylinders like that. Either way, it's just a solid piece of metal. There's no voodoo inside. It follows the cam lobe and actuates the pushrod. Now, in addition to a lack of noise, the other great thing, from a production standpoint at least, not so much for our purposes, is that you don't need to have an adjustable rocker arm like a solid lifter engine would use. So Chrysler was able to literally stamp out these basic sheet metal rockers. There's no adjustment here. You see, there is a range of positions in which this hydraulic lifter will perform adequately, happily, with no issues. The pushrod could be slightly longer or shorter. The rockers could end up in slightly a different place. The base circle of the cam could be a little bit larger, a little bit smaller. That piston can move thanks to this cushion of oil, and so there is a range in which it will perform. And when the factory put these engines together, all of those components I mentioned were within a certain tolerance. They certainly weren't precise, but they were designed to end up close enough in the hydraulic lifter's working range so everything would be great. Once you replace any of those components, the valves, the rockers, the rocker shafts, the push rods, the lifters, the camshaft, or machine the cylinder head, the deck surfaces of the block, etc., you may end up outside of that working range. And that's what's happening here. It's going to be very hard to show you the lifter itself down inside the engine. Just know that I've got the rocker shaft loosened on this side, and I snugged it down until that pushrod is just contacting the lifter. This is a process familiar to Chevy builders. This would be known as zero lash. You take all the play out, the pushrod is just perfectly touching that lifter, but there's no preload against it. Look at the gap I had to leave underneath the rocker shaft to accomplish that. As I carefully snug this down with my impact, watch how much the rocker moves and how far down it pushes the pushrod. I gotta tell you, I just caught something here during editing that I did not notice when I was filming this, and you may have just seen. The valve actually opened instead of the pushrod compressing into the lifter. And that right there may be the actual cause of this issue. There's something goofy going on with these lifters, and I don't know what the deal is, but I do know that the solution is going to be the same, and we'll get to that in just a minute. You see, there are multiple issues that crop up with this design. The first, and probably most important as mentioned, is stacking tolerances leading to a valve train geometry that no longer works with these lifters. But there's a second that's really important for high performance uses. Especially at high RPM, there is a capability for this cushion of oil to push the piston upward and hang the valve open. This is called floating valves, and it's bad. Many builders of performance Mopar engines over the years have encountered exactly this. You put a spicy camshaft in your engine and other performance parts, you go out and rev the piss out of it, and it will not reach the high RPMs you're expecting. The number one cause of that is premature valve float from these hydraulic lifters pumping up. But there is a quick and easy way that you can basically turn your hydraulic lifters into solid lifters. And that is by throwing away your original non-adjustable rocker arms and installing a set of adjustable ones. Whoo, packing peanuts. Tom loves packing peanuts. I'm gonna go put these in his office. This, I believe, is a box of rocker arm pieces. Apparently some assembly is required. Yes, sometime today. This is a set of aluminum 1.5 ratio adjustable roller rockers from 440 Source. This is the cheapest way to get a set of adjustable roller rockers by far. This is only the second set of these rockers we've ever bought. The first set are in this stroker engine, under the hood of a 73 Charger, which hopefully we'll be seeing more on in the near future. You said moron. It's probably immediately obvious that buying the cheapest version of something might not be the best move. I'll tell you what, in this car, we just want to stop breaking rocker arms. This thing is not going to live at 6,000 RPM or higher, ever. So these should be up to the task. I can tell you in the first set I installed, there were gacked threads in a couple of the arms, so you're going to want to go through and check all of those. You'll notice the rockers are all sitting on the specially built shafts that ship with them, but they have to be taken back off because the center spacers are not installed. There are also shims here, so we can fine-tune the center of each rocker over each valve tip, and that's a good thing. We also got a set of their standard length B-engine adjustable rocker push rods to match. Now these are a 3/8 diameter. Hopefully they fit our factory heads with no issue. With their aluminum heads, they actually don't fit without some modification, so that's fun. The 100% correct move here would have been to measure and order a custom length set of push rods that fit perfectly. But here's the thing. The whole point of these arms is that they are adjustable. That adjustment point is directly over the push rod. So when you screw this thing in and out, what you're doing effectively is changing the length of the push rod. Unlike on a GM engine, which has its adjustment right in the middle of the rocker, in that case, you're moving the entire rocker and changing the valve train rocker geometry at the same time. We won't have that problem. So there's a much greater range in which our push rod length will be just fine. Here's a vastly over-dramatized and terribly drawn picture to kind of show what I'm talking about. On the left, you've got the shaft-mounted Mopar. Note, as the adjuster moves, the rocker's position in relation to the valve never changes. With the Chevy system, because the adjuster is in the middle, as you tighten it, the entire arm can move, and that changes your valve train geometry, which is bad. On the Mopar, it's essentially preset. The only way that can get messed up is with the height of your valve changing, which could be an issue we have too. But essentially, on the Mopar, setting the valve train up like this is super easy. Unless the pushrod length is off by like 3/8 of an inch or more, we're gonna be just fine. So, time to put some rockers together. First, I've got to excavate my only available work surface in the shop. Some of this crap is even mine. That's 2 rocker shafts, fully assembled. Note, I've got the adjusters backed all the way out, so the balls are just sitting past the body of the rocker there. Only 2 of them had mild issues in the threads. Not too bad, and I was still able to run those studs in by hand, so we're good there. Note, of course, like factory, there are 3 small hold downs, 2 large ones. The large hold downs get longer bolts, the small ones get smaller bolts. And of course, the spacers go here between the rockers. It's all pretty self-explanatory. The part that's a little more challenging is getting the arms correct left and right. It's easier with these aftermarket ones because the difference is so stark. With factory stamped steel rockers, they look very similar, and you really have to study the shape of the ends of them to figure out which ones are left and right. Now I've assembled these without any shims. We've got a pack of those here. I'm going to set these on the heads, and we'll see where everything lines up in relation to the valve tips to decide if we need to do any of that. Here's a first look at these excessively fancy adjustable rockers installed on the driver's side. Just sitting here for mock-up again so I can eyeball shims. Looks to me like no major adjustment's going to be required. I'll probably just drop one in all of these gaps to close them up a little bit, but in general, I think we're fine. If you're wondering, like I'm wondering, whether these are going to fit under stock valve covers, well, we're all going to find out together. I mentioned valve height as being a possible contributor to this issue. I did check, and the contact pattern from the old rocker arms was right down the middle of the valve stems, so I feel good about that. These look good, but of course we won't really know what kind of pattern we're getting until we actually run the engine, or at least crank it over by hand with these fully installed. I do not show how to check this in this video. Frankly, it's never been a problem for me, ever, not once. I think that's more of a Chevy thing. But what you do is you put some marker or something similar on the tip of the valve, you crank the engine through its rotation a couple times, then you pull the rockers off and look for a pattern. You want to see a line somewhere around the middle of the valve tip. If it's not there, well, you're going to have to change the rocker geometry somehow, and that is well beyond the scope of this video. There's one of our push rods installed, and I did run the adjuster down. That is now at roughly 0 lash. Of course, we'll be rechecking that after the rockers are actually tight, but it's definitely close. The cup is clear of the rocker. That all looks really good. The 3/8 push rod does seem to clear the head, But note, with no shim here alongside the rocker, it is possible to move it over close enough that it almost contacts. So with shims in there again, we should be just fine. I've got the shims out now so I can distribute them as mentioned. Make sure you check your new parts and clean them. These are covered in like sand. I don't know why, but yeah. That's an important rule of engine building. Never assume anything is clean. Clean every single thing yourself. Here's a look at that adjuster that I ran down for that push rod. Again, that's looking pretty good. Driver's side push rods are in place. Note, I've got a length of wire helping to hold them up. I'll drop the rockers in, get all the little balls installed and the bolts snug down, and then I'll pull that wire out of there. Okay, in place. Bolted down, although not torqued yet. I'll do that in a moment. Now I'm working on the valve adjustment. Now again, the magic trick here is essentially to turn the hydraulic lifter into a solid lifter. The way we do that is by letting the piston come all the way up out of it, such that it's fully filled with oil at all times. It could possibly compress, but it could never open any further and float the valve. So, one by one, we need to get every lifter on the base circle and take all of the play out of this adjuster, such that it's set to 0 lash. Every Chevy owner that's ever done a valve adjust anyway, is familiar with this process. It's exactly the same. You're just going to carefully snug the adjuster down to take all the play out of this push rod. Now note, I can still squish the piston a little bit, but there's no more free play there. Get it just right there, so there's just barely drag on it. Now, of course, to make this adjustment, I had to bump the engine over and make sure that valve was not on lift. There it's on lift, there it's well off lift, and it's on the base circle. Some people get super scientific about this, adjusting them at different intervals as the engine turns over. I don't do that. I just go valve by valve, bumping the engine over, making sure they're all on the base circle, setting them like this, snug the nut down, and then move on. As you can see, I've only got 2 left to do. Notice I said 0 lash. That means taking all the play out of the push rod so it's just perfectly against the piston. I could leave them like that, but there are 2 possible issues. 1, set right at 0, you may get the smallest amount of valve train noise. Doesn't bother me, but you know, this isn't a race car, it's a cruiser. 2, apparently, in some situations, when they're lashed at 0, the piston in the lifter can whack up against the clip that retains it, and in some cases the clips can pop out. Now I've never seen that happen, but I've heard it can, so I'm going to run the tiniest amount of preload that I can just to kind of hedge my bets against both of these issues. I'm going to go for a 1/4 turn of preload. That means I'm going to loosen the jam nuts around those adjusters, insert the Allen wrench, and turn it 90 degrees. Then I'm going to torque the jam nuts down, and we'll be good to go. Then I get to find out if that valve cover will even fit back in here, and I'm not holding my breath. Done. Preloaded. Torqued. Ready to rock. All right, here's the first crank of the engine with new rockers and push rods and all that. It's entirely possible the compression will sound uneven as it cranks over the first few times and fills up those lifters. Let's find out. There we go. Sounds happy. I can tell you it's definitely a tight fit around the end rocker stands. Like very tight, but it doesn't seem to be hitting anywhere else. Oh, right. Looks good. Now for the fun side. I have a couple more thoughts on this I want to get down before they disappear into the ether. It has occurred to me that the way we probably got into this situation is with stacking tolerances, issues caused by aftermarket parts. So I'm solving that problem with more aftermarket parts. This problem is a little more easily solved on a small block. For a small block, you can go out and get a set of original adjustable 273 rocker arms, pop them right on your later engine, and you've just solved this problem in a cheaper, easier, more factory-esque way. As long as you grab the matching push rods, of course. There were early big blocks with adjustable rockers, specifically like max wedge engines. They're a little harder to come by, a little more desirable, a little more expensive. So the aftermarket stuff is probably the way to go in this case. There are many more brands out there that make these adjustable rockers. If this was some kind of hardcore race car, well, we'd probably be looking at some of those, but it's not. It's a street car. Here's a nice look at the pushrod and rocker situation now that it's out of the engine. Isn't that cool? It doesn't really want to come out. And there's a little broken cup. Again, make sure you fish the broken pieces out of the engine. That's important. If something breaks in your engine and you're going to fix it and run it, you want to have eyes on every little piece of debris. Otherwise, bad stuff could happen down the line. Another day, another 75-year-old Dodge truck. It's a whole engine again, so I guess let's see what happens when I hit the key. Big money! Is it just me, or does it sound terrible? Thankfully, that noise seems to be on the driver's side. You know, the one that's actually possible to get on and off, so I guess that's what I'm doing now. I did break out the stethoscope. Pretty sure it's a rocker crashing into the baffle on this side. Of course, you watched me test it for noises, but allegedly the valve cover wasn't bolted down then, so yeah. I probably just have to pull that thing off and clean a couple spots with a hammer. I've had to do that before. I definitely prefer that to the alternative, you know, taking this thing apart for the 8th time. Just a little contact. Yeah, just a little contact on the tippies of the adjuster studs there. Especially that one. Some light hammer work on the valve cover and we'll be good to go. Okay, I don't know what this is, but it just fell out from on top of this baffle while I've been beating it savagely with a body hammer. Better to get it out now than later, I guess. Well, an hour, a bunch of hammering, a small amount of welding, and swearing later. That side's good. Turns out that side makes noise too, though. It's just not as loud. We had the same exact thing happen on the yellow 70 Cuda. I think that thing had crane rockers. Don't remember. I didn't build that one. We just first fired it and hey, what's that weird noise? It was just like this. Anyway, I'm gonna take the impossible cover out again and beat on that with a hammer and then put it back in and hopefully everything will be good. Yeah, same crap, different cover. We're good. Don't ask me why that alternator has like a supercharged whine, but there it is. Did you know it's pretty much a rule that AC compressor belts squeal? This thing is no exception, and believe me when I say we've tried to fix that. Why is my dishwasher so loud? Anyway, quick answer to some questions we got on this compressor. Many people on the last video said, why didn't you just get an RV2 compressor? Remember, this wasn't an AC car. It had none of the parts we needed. You can just buy this compressor with all the brackets and all the fittings and the hoses and the condenser and everything else from Classic Auto Air. It's super easy. If you want to put a factory RV2 type compressor on your car, great. Have fun tracking down all the pieces to accomplish that. If you're doing a complete leather restoration, awesome. If you don't care what it looks like and you just want a system that works, that's a great way to go. And remember, this one lives right next to an EFI system in a car that has an overdrive automatic GM transmission. We're not exactly concerned with factory looks. Does that make sense? Good. Now I'm going to shut the hood before anything else goes wrong. Take this thing for a test drive. Oh, the Sniper. My old friend. I'm not a fan. I think I've mentioned that. You know, I actually took some flack for installing an EFI kit on my 63 Valiant. Who has done more for convincing people not to use EFI kits than me? Oh, I did that because turbo. I'm gonna take this thing for a drive and hopefully it doesn't make any horrible noises anymore. Apparently sometimes there's a noise in the column. I don't remember hearing that before. Yet another thing to add to the list. As long as it runs well, I'm happy. And run well it does. And it's not even making any horrible noises. Last time, it only got right up here before the horrible noises started again. So, I guess we'll go right up here. We just rebuilt the column, and I think one of those bearings is too tight or something, because it doesn't quite feel right. I didn't notice this the other day. Anyway, so far the engine is happy, and the engine, that's my department. Another beautiful day by the elk viewing spot. Maybe someday we'll view some elk here. In the comments on my recent 71 Roadrunner video, I was asked about a recipe for nice front end upgrades for a B-body like this one. I actually already did a video all about that with this very car, like a year ago, maybe? It's pretty basic. Offset upper control arm bushings, factory disc brakes. That's factory disc brakes from a later car, like for example a 73 Charger. We've always gotten kits for this from Right Stuff Detailing. A nice heavy duty sway bar, polyurethane lower control arm bushings and strut rods, decent shock absorbers like KYBs or even better Bilsteins, modern radial tires on at least a 15-inch diameter wheel, and modern alignment specs. Done. Now we need to get some more miles on this and make sure it hangs together. I'm confident that was a step in the right direction, if not the ultimate fix. The only other thing I could think of is like binding coil springs are really screwed up in stalled height. They look right, and this is a pretty mild camshaft. So there you go. Back in the spot with this thing, hopefully for the last time for a while. I love Coronets, and I like this car. I just wanted to go home, that's all. Hopefully, if you've got a performance build like this in the works for yourself, you can take something useful away from this. Scrutinize all your aftermarket parts, verify your pushrod length, maybe just go for the adjustable rockers. It's a good move. And if not that, well, hopefully you enjoyed watching me suffer, as usual. In any case, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, if you open your mind too much, your brain will fall out. Whee!